welcome to the Giraffe Social Media Podcast. It's what social media managers are talking about. I'm Chloe Belchamber, and on today's episode, I'm direct messaging Influencer's Global Strategy and Partnerships Director, Nick Speller. We'll be discussing consumer trends throughout the pandemic and how influencers are helping businesses bounce back after lockdown. Nick, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
How's your week been so far? Are you enjoying the sunny weather?
Yeah, it's turned a bit windy now, hasn't it? Well, it has in London anyway, but yeah, the sunshine is definitely welcome. I'm craving, like everyone else, the spring to start properly.
Yes, we're so close now. I almost have just accepted that it's spring now, and I keep going outside and freezing to death because I'm dressing for spring now as well. So hopefully it's not too far away. So we like to start all of our direct message episodes the same way, with a round of quick fire questions. Nick, I haven't pre-warned you about this, but are you ready to answer a few of my burning questions?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right, let's get started. Question 1, tea or coffee?
Coffee, 100%.
Facebook or LinkedIn?
Can I say neither?
Yes, definitely. Work from home or work in the office?
The office. Again, 100%.
Scroll through Twitter or read a newspaper?
It's got to be Twitter. I can't think of the last time I read a newspaper.
Give up social media or give up Netflix?
Give up Netflix. Yeah, it'd have to be.
Fair. Influencer marketing or paid advertising?
Influencer marketing,
Obviously. Casual Fridays or bring your pet to work day?
I don't have a pet, so I'll have to go with Casual Fridays.
Oh. Follow foodies on Instagram or follow fitness?
It's got to be food, hasn't it?
Always. Food over fitness, always. Work hard or play hard?
I just work hard. There's no time for play in my life.
And finally, I know you don't have pets, but cats or dogs?
I'd have to go for a dog.
Always and forever a dog person. Right, well, first things first, I want to ask you about Influencer and how it started and what you guys do over there, because I know they have a pretty cool backstory, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not hugely involved in the backstory. I joined a couple of years after they started, but yeah, I mean, it's I guess it's a bit of a classic tech company story. Young guy, I think Ben was 19, 18, something like that when he set the company up. Had an idea, saw an opportunity, got in touch with an equally young YouTuber, Casper Lee, who'd made a successful name for himself on YouTube, pitched him the idea, and they joined forces to launch the company. And I think they launched something like 6 months after that first meeting. So again, classic tech company startup, big idea, quick to market. And I was going to say the rest is history, but we're still building the business. So yeah, the rest is continually history.
And you started your journey with Influencer as head of campaigns. You're now, of course, part of their global marketing team. How did you first become involved in social media and influencer marketing?
Yeah, good question. I've always worked in marketing since. In fact, I remember the day when I suggested to my boss we took a look at this thing called Twitter because we thought it might be big in the future. And that was years ago, and I worked in print marketing, email marketing kind of role. I decided I was going to do bit of freelance marketing for a bit, picked up a few clients, particularly on the sales side. And at the time I was working with a friend of mine who runs a blog, quite a successful blog called Buckets and Spades, up in Blackpool in the north of England. And I was just helping him out with bits and pieces, doing some writing, doing some photography. And it's just a timing thing, really, I guess, for me. I just happened to step into that world at the time that Instagram launched and became big, and also a significant shift from, companies just reaching out to blogs and asking for coverage in return for free product, and actually shifting to money. And I remember, Matt, the guy who runs the blog, sending me an email one day saying, "Hey, we've got a project. These guys actually want to pay us some money for the work that we're doing." So it was kind of a bit of an eye opener. And I guess for me, I'm not hugely creative. So while Matt took the lead on the blog and he's now a very successful influencer in his own right, I was much more behind the scenes, helping him out on the kind of commercial side. And in doing that, building a network and building a knowledge of people and the way that influencer marketing was kind of going, and I could see it really ramping up. So I started doing a few campaigns myself, and then decided that working for myself was perhaps not exactly what I wanted to do. So I jumped into a large agency called Havas, started working there on their influencer team as it was born, and then I've gone from there, really moved from kind of job to job through some different roles at different stages of the influencer marketing journey, and then found myself an influencer.
Wow, yeah, that sounds like one impressive journey. For those listening who might not be quite across it, myself included, what does the role of a strategy and partnerships director involve?
That's a good question. I guess it's a hybrid role, as the name suggests. I have sort of managed two teams, really. One of them is our strategy team, as you might expect. Their job is to develop our commercial responses for current and prospective clients. So a lot of our work is based around briefs. So a client will come to us and say, hey, I'm launching a new car in September. I've got this budget to play with for influencers. What do we suggest we do? And our team sit down, look at their goal, look at their ambitions, assess a whole range of factors, and then put together a commercial response, which we hope that they'll like the look of. And then we go from there. And once we've kind of won the business, then our delivery team, our campaigns team, take on the actual running of the campaign. On the other side of my job, the partnership side, I'm kind of in close contact with Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, Pinterest, all the social networks, and a few other research providers to try and strengthen our relationship, our knowledge, our understanding, and also the data that we get from these guys, and just really build out our business so that we're a lot stronger with the other stakeholders in it. So that's the kind of two dual nature of the job.
Yeah, it sounds like you do a lot over there. What would you say your most favorite thing about your job is?
That's such a tough one. I think the variety of clients we work on is one thing. More and more clients from more and more industries are getting involved in influencer marketing, which makes it hugely variable. There's also the ever-shifting nature of influencer marketing. It's, the content types are changing, the people involved are changing, the regulations are changing. That always keeps you on your toes, always means a new week is definitely a new week. And then the people as well. I think most people who work in this industry are very passionate about the industry. They got involved because they sort of see the opportunities that influencer marketing offers, both influencers and brands, and that really what drives them forward. So it's always good to work with people who are inspired in their day-to-day work.
Yeah, absolutely. Before our interview, I was reading a report that Influencer recently co-branded. It was about 2020 and the effects coronavirus has had on the industry as a whole. Research found that 72% of consumers who follow influencers in the UK and US said they spent more time on social media per day since the outbreak began. Do you think there's been a kind of shift in the content we're seeing now compared to last year?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when COVID struck, there was a sudden, almost a pause from a lot of influencers. They were a bit stuck. Their usual content streams, if I can call it that, had dried up. They couldn't leave the house, or they couldn't do a lot of things that led to them generating the content their audience were used to seeing. So there was probably a 2-week period where you kind of saw a bit of a hiatus there. But creators are very, very flexible. Is that the word I want to use? They're kind of hugely adaptable, and a lot of them changed very, very quickly, switched up their content types, and found new content streams that their audience still appreciated. And I think a lot of them did it faster than other media and definitely other brands, and were really able to kind of produce something which kept their audience interested at a time when a lot of people were turning to social media, but the opportunities for content creation were far lower. I definitely think as well within that, you've seen, and maybe this is a result of COVID, I'm not too sure, last summer there was a lot of different forms of activism, and a lot of influencers for the first time stepped into that realm. So you started to see a content shift away from, I guess, just your typical lifestyle imagery of where do I eat, where do I drink, what do I buy, what do I shop, and more, what do I think of the world? How can we improve the world? My views, my kind of ambitions for the future of the world. And that was a really interesting shift in content, because I don't think in the main we'd seen that before. Influencers prior to that summer had taken a bit of a stance of kind of isolation from world events and world affairs, and it was the first time we'd seen that creep into people's content a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, something I found really interesting in the report was that before COVID, the top creator categories across the UK and US were food, music, and travel. Whereas now, current affairs, well-being, fitness, and health, all those sorts of things, those accounts have experienced the biggest increase in followers. So I guess you kind of answered it just then, but do you agree there's been this cultural shift where consumers are craving more content that kind of resonates with the current climate?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think, I don't know, my reflection on that is that people seem to have stepped up, audiences seem to have stepped up, and they don't just want to see the people they like, they want to hear from them. They want to hear their voices, and they want to hear their voice from the perspective of what do they mean and what do they believe. And I think you've seen over the last 12 to 18 months a lot of change in who people follow as they realise that perhaps people they loved for their fashion content or their beauty content or whatever content don't share the same social and political views that they do, and other people have filled that gap for them. I also think you can see a rise in different content types as well. So we've seen Instagram launch Instagram Rooms or whatever it might be called, and you've also got apps like Stereo and Clubhouse that are providing a platform for that, which is kind of, I guess, a social media for podcasts. So I guess podcast listening has obviously become really, really big in the last year and was already pretty big before. But now we're seeing apps that are catering to that and allowing creators to jump on and give their opinions almost instantaneously on, the various goings on in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess in the same way that people are kind of expecting more from influencers now, there's been a change in the expectations surrounding the role of brands as well during this time. I think there's a big desire for businesses to become more transparent and informative with their audience about, those beliefs that you just touched on. So how does influencer marketing tie into that? And how can brands make sure they're working with creators that share the same values as them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit of a tough one. I think it's really important. Brand creator fit has always been a key pillar in influencer marketing, and I think you're right to say that in the past that was quite light. So it was, what did the creator look like? What's their content type? What's their audience profile? That's now moved into, what do they stand for? What do they believe? Brands are very, very, the due diligence there is becoming more intense, and rightly so. Some brands are hotter on it than others, I'm sure you'll understand. But I actually think the kind of reverse has become true as well, probably more so than brands scrutinizing influencers. It's influencers scrutinizing brands and saying, do these brands represent what I want to represent to my audience? And, we've seen a rise in interest in sustainability and diversity and equality, and creators are sort of realizing, or have realized, that they can't promote these things on a Monday and then run an ad on a Tuesday for a brand who isn't aligned with those views, because it's a jarring experience for the audience, and it also has the potential to cause backlash. People aren't stupid. They see that and they think, well, you can't be promoting sustainability one day and then working for a dubious fast fashion brand the next. So I think a lot of creators are now taking that, or have taken that step back, and are really scrutinizing who they work with and how, and making sure that aligns with their own views and their own ethos.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that something you guys have experienced a lot recently? Like, have you ever reached out to a few influencers who have turned that brand down for the exact reason?
I mean, I guess I'm a little disconnected from that now. I don't work on the campaign side, so I couldn't point to any specific examples, although I do know that we've had, specific examples where creators have turned down work because of the brand. I know we've definitely had pushback from creators on proof points. So we've approached a creator and they've said, really sounds cool, like the look of the product, like the look of the brand. However, could you answer these questions for me on sustainability? And a few creators have actually got now a kind of set survey they send out to any brand that wants to work with them, and they say, fill this in. I need to check that you do adhere to all these various policies that form the kind of the cornerstones of my beliefs. And if you do, we'll work together, and if you don't, then I won't work on a campaign. So we've definitely seen a lot of that coming into the industry.
Yeah, that's super cool to hear. Moving into your area of expertise now, selecting the right strategy for any influencer marketing campaign requires a combination of data, human insight, and transparency. In the past, influencers have been able to manipulate certain data through buying likes and followers, and more recently, joining engagement groups, that sort of thing. How can brands run more data-driven campaigns?
Yeah, I think the data is now out there. A couple of years ago, maybe there was a limited amount of data in this industry, which kind of constrained brands in the due diligence they could undertake. But there's enough of it out there now, and I think the emphasis for brands should be on understanding data and analyzing the data they can get hold of. I think for a lot of brands and some agencies out there, data is a byproduct of a campaign. So they run the campaign, they look at stats, and they go, hey, we did all right, or hey, we didn't do all right. Actually, that data's there before the campaign should be run. There's plenty of it out there. And people, brands need to sit down and look at that data and say to themselves, okay, how do we analyze this data correctly to steer us in the right way? So when it comes to fake followers, when it comes to fake engagement, I mean, all of that is really important. But actually, what's most important is that you are reaching the audience you want to reach and having an impact on them that generates whatever it is you're looking to generate. Now, all of that kind of fake stuff, all that fakery is generally flushed out by putting that at the center. So if you have someone who's bought a lot of followers and they've bought them from countries around the world, you just need to look at their demographics and say, okay, we want to reach a UK audience. This person doesn't have a strong UK audience. That's not saying necessarily that they've been cheating, but why would you work with them if they don't have that audience? It would be the same as buying magazine advertising in a Brazilian magazine when you're a London-based coffee shop. It's a far stretch to consider that that's really going to generate much of a return for you. So that's what brands need to do. And I think a lot of brands out there don't consider the data, as I said, until after the event. And then they look at it and go, oh yeah, we got this many likes, we got this many impressions. But really they need to be looking at that up front. And they need to be setting their own parameters for acceptable levels in this. So what audience demographics are we looking to achieve, and what's the lowest threshold we'd be willing to work with? Is that kind of thing that brands need to bring in to ensure that they're not working with the wrong people and they are working with the right ones.
Yeah. Well, speaking of sponsored content, I think there's a lot of confusion around the disclosure of advertising within the influencer marketing industry. I saw a poll in the UK last year found 61% of people believed influencers don't actually have to disclose that they've been paid to talk about a product, but that's not the case, is it?
No. Anyone who's advertising anything online needs to disclose clearly that it's that the content is an advert. They need to, and even if they're not being paid, if they're being gifted product, they need to disclose that too, because gifted product is a payment in kind, really. It might not be financial, but you're still receiving a valuable thing in return for the content you put out. So yeah, I can understand that a lot of consumers out there don't realize that those are the rules. And I think that's generated in part by the fact that they see a lot of posts which are clearly adverts but haven't been marked as so. It's also a relatively new industry, so there's a lack of understanding there. And I think as well, you've got that mindset amongst consumers and amongst influencers that rules and regulations are for businesses. I'm just an influencer with 20,000 followers. Rules don't apply to me in the same way that they apply to Starbucks or McDonald's or Twitter or Facebook. And so they just don't think about it. And part of that's, it's kind of an ignorance, but it's an understandable ignorance. If you start taking photos of your house and suddenly you've got 20,000 followers and you've got an account that focuses on your interior design, you don't necessarily think, well, hang on, is this regulated? No one shows up at the door and knocks on the door and hands you a pack of information and says, congratulations, you're now an influencer, here are the rules and regulations you need to follow. So I can understand why creators don't get it right, but I think we're now entering a bit of an age where most people who operate in this space know that rules exist. They know where to find them. They're easy to read, they're easy to understand, and they're fairly easy to apply. So I think in the next 6 months to a year, we're going to get to a stage where there isn't really an excuse of ignorance anymore.
Yeah, that's a really good point about, you may just start an account for fun and then next thing you know, you're an influencer and you might not be aware of those rules if you're new to the space. But is there a way for brands and creators to run better partnerships with confidence?
Confidence in what way do you mean? Confidence in terms of disclosure or confidence in terms of success?
I think in terms of disclosure, like there's still a lot of confusion around it. So what's one good way that
I think,
they can
I
have
mean,
confidence?
yeah, there's some fairly standard rules out there that people could just apply, like using hashtag ad and making sure it's at the front of your content. It's a really simple one, but the simpler thing to do in a way is to look at it from the perspective of a consumer. The rules are clear in that any consumer who sees this content must be able to easily understand it's an advert. So kind of, sticking the ad in front of your mum and saying, what do you think this is an advert? And seeing the reaction. And I think most people would be fairly surprised that without those disclosures, the person you put it in front of doesn't know it's an advert. So it's asking yourself that question. And I think as well, going back to the increase, I guess, in morality, if we can call it that, or ethics amongst influencers and amongst their audiences, we're already starting to see a reaction from people when influencers don't disclose adverts correctly. We're seeing their audiences comment and go, "Hey, is this an ad? You haven't done this." And that's because I guess a lot of audiences they appreciate the creators who do disclose, and then they get annoyed with those who don't because they feel like it's an unfair playing field. And why, the person I follow with 30,000 followers who discloses everything correctly, why should they go to all that trouble if we've then got someone with 1 million followers who I also follow who's never disclosing? So eventually I'm going to get annoyed by that and start to call it out. And I think we're already starting to see that, which is definitely seeing a shift in the industry towards a higher degree of disclosure.
Mm. Going back to, the numerical metrics that influencers can offer a brand, what are some important traits or qualities about influencers as individuals that brands should be looking for? I know we've touched on a few already when it comes to sort of ethics, but is there anything else?
I guess it's a difficult one without knowing who the brand might be. I suppose, from the point of view of assessing the creator, there's some fairly obvious ones. Consistent quality of content, a clear ethos and angle on everything they do. But I mean, if a brand wants to commit themselves to thorough due diligence, it's about running creators through Google searches. It's about looking at something like their Twitter feed to understand, are they on there spouting things they shouldn't be on a Saturday night? It's that kind of thing that brands need to look at. Unfortunately, there's no kind of there's no one line in the sand that one brand can say, hey, this is the objective definition of morality, and therefore everyone to the left of it's not to be worked with and everyone to the right is. For each brand and even on each campaign, that line needs to be drawn, it needs to be assessed, and then everyone needs to be assessed against that. And at Influencer, we work with some brands who are incredibly brand safe. Their due diligence into how we search for influencers and what we look for, it takes up a lot of time, and kind of rightly so. There are other brands for whom it's not so much of an issue. They're not selling products that require them to work with people who are incredibly squeaky clean. And the fact that someone might have sworn about a football result on a Saturday afternoon on Twitter isn't going to be a problem for them. But some of the other brands are going to be like, no, if you've sworn, you're out. So it's completely up to those brands really and how they want to play that.
Absolutely. Well, according to Rakuten, 65% of people discover a new brand or a product through an influencer at least once a week, which I think is huge and really awesome to hear. What kind of impact do creators have on brand discovery?
I think it's massive. I think it's the one area that's actually very hard to quantify, but is the most important aspect of influencer marketing. And I think this is where influencer marketing was generated from. It was generated from bloggers who talked about products they loved, services they loved, brands they loved, and shared their lifestyle. What they got up to on a Saturday, what they do during the week, how they commute to work, and where they stop for coffee on the way. It's all those kind of things that people hook into. And I think it comes down to, and I was reading something on a Google article the other day about curation and the importance of, if you're an e-commerce website, just throwing up every product you have in an alphabetical list is not going to generate as many sales as carefully curating your product pages so that people can see your best products. And I think influencers are almost the curators of that curation, because even then you've got however many e-commerce brands, you've got however many high street shops, they're all producing and projecting a curated stock list, but there's still a huge number of brands out there, a huge number of products, and influencers can latch onto that and kind of do the legwork for a lot of people. Even in lockdown, people are still finding themselves time poor. They don't want to do all that research. And actually, if they find a creator who resonates with them in terms of the way they live their life, what they say, what they do, what they look like, how they dress, then they can start to follow that person and go, do you know what? I'm not going to look through a list of 400 pairs of trainers. I'm just going to buy the pair of trainers that this guy buys or this girl buys. And I think that's the real power. I think that becomes quite difficult to quantify. And there's lots of surveys that shows it's true, but on an individual campaign basis, five creators who you know and love all wear a pair of Vans shoes. Does that mean you then go out and immediately buy a pair of Vans shoes? Or do you think about it for 6 months, then buy a pair of Vans shoes? Even if you go out immediately, where's the connection there digitally between you looking at that Instagram post and then going and making that purchase? A lot of that information and data is lost. So it's very hard to then prove that, that campaign generated those sales. But I think there's a truth in that, and it's a powerful one. It's just for us as an industry to work a lot harder to try and unpick that and show brands that that's where the power lies.
Yeah, you're so right. And obviously, there's a multitude of platforms that someone can carry out an influencer marketing campaign on. But where does influencer marketing hold the most potential right now, in your opinion?
I think it's making people think about the brands. I think maybe I'm just keep coming back to this too much, but I think it is that issue of morality and ethics. It's influencer marketing has the power to influence not just what you consume, but how you consume and why. And I think, sustainability, diversity, equality, the things I mentioned previously, they've all got that buzzword edge around them, but they are considered that for a reason. They are important aspects of our lives that, as consumers and individuals in society, are things we have strong views on. And we want to see that reflected in the purchases we make and the brands we support, and then the curators of those brands, the people who bring us those brands, so the media channels and also the influencers themselves. And I think influencers actually hold a massive power to unpick brands and show us why they support that brand in a way that a brand can't do. Because a brand that's, if you could rate ethics on a score of 0 to 10 and you said this, and a brand comes forward and says, hey, we're a 9.5, well, that's the brand saying that. I only have their word to go on it. And an influencer could be wrong in their assessment. But if I follow an influencer who's really passionate about sustainable fashion and they say, hey, I've checked this brand out, they are as sustainable can be when it comes to fashion, I'm going to believe that. And I'm probably not going to do too much reading into what they've actually said, but it's almost that seal of approval and it's that thumbs up from them that's going to make me think, okay, cool, this is a brand I need to gravitate towards if I want to maintain my own credentials of sustainable fashion and sustainable shopping. So I think that's the kind of next step for influencer marketing. I think it's, talked about that curation of products. I think we've also looking at those almost a curation of ideas and inspiring action amongst people rather than just inspiring purchase. So I really think that the next, I think that's happening now, but I think it's going to become more and more acute in the next 3, 6, 12 months and beyond.
Yeah, you're so right. Like, I feel like people trust the opinions of people more than they would a brand. Like, a brand could send out the exact same message as an influencer was, and maybe the influencer's audience would receive it a little better and with a bit more trust. So that's a really good point to make. We've touched on how coronavirus has had a massive impact on not just the influencer industry, but many others like the hospitality industry and especially like the travel sector. Do you think influencers may be the key in helping these industries bounce back in the next year or so?
I would say yes, wouldn't I? Going back to that whole, brand self-assessing itself. Yeah, of course, influencer marketing is where you want to put your money. But I do genuinely believe that for those industries that had a strong influencer marketing element prior to COVID, travel being the key one or one of the key ones, that's going to come back. And it's probably going to be the first thing that arrives because one of the beauty of working with influencers is they're hugely adaptable. And, let's say Iceland want to inspire everyone to travel to Iceland in the next few months. Let's say they cure COVID and everyone's free to go there. influencers can be on a plane within a day. They can be there creating content within 24 hours. You can start to inspire people to follow those influencers in the sense of also booking a holiday to Iceland in a very, very, very quick time and a very low cost relative to other forms of media. So I can see them being really, really important in that aspect. And also the flexibility of influencers as well. You know, you're going to send some influencers away to a foreign country, they're going to produce content, and then should the worst happen and COVID has a bounce back and everything goes into lockdown, you haven't spent millions of pounds on a media campaign. You haven't filmed huge, big budget shots of, you know, beaches and hotels and things to see and do. You haven't lost all of that money. You've just spent a little bit of money on a couple of influencers. So it's a very quick, relatively cheap way of producing some flexible marketing, which can be dialed up and dialed down based on what's to come next. And I think while all of us would love COVID to wrap up and get on its merry way pretty quickly, we all know that there's probably going to be some hiccups along the way. And for brands, it's not going to be as simple as just turning the marketing tap back on and seeing loads of people book flights, holidays and the like immediately. So I think influencers will have a kind of key parts to play in that element.
Mm. Well, Nick, I asked you at the beginning of this interview what your favourite thing about your job is. Is there anything you dislike about it?
Working from home at the minute. That's a cop-out. It's a complete cop-out, but I'm going to go for it. I think, you know, every industry, every company has its stresses, has its strains. I think, you know, I'm sure you guys are feeling this too. There is an odd pressure from working in this environment for so long, and those kind of human connections that we've built up. You know, influencer marketing is a very people-to-people business, whether it's within the business itself or whether it's with the creators, and not having that people-to-people connection starts to put a strain on things. So I can't wait till we're back to normal. We can have events, we can go and see people. You know, when influencers do fashion shoots or travel shoots, we can accompany them again and kind of get to know them personally and get to see the work that they do and how they deliver it. That kind of thing has been missing for the last 12 months, 18 months, or however long it's been. And that really, you know, that's been the least favourite part of my job, the kind of being tied to the desk for the last 12 months.
Yeah, I agree. I can't wait to get back into the office. So looking forward to it.
Sure.
Finally, what do you think the future of influencer marketing looks like?
I think we've touched on quite a few of these points already, but I can see greater specialization happening already. And that's within channels and within creators. I think there's going to be a kind of greater fragmentation and then specialization. So channel, and I think the social networks are actually struggling to buy that fact. You're seeing the likes of Twitter and Instagram try to copy everything else which is becoming popular, and in doing so kind of losing what makes them special. So, you know, Twitter's stories or whatever they were called really don't seem to have had an uptake because I just don't think people want to consume content like that on Twitter. That's my own personal view. Similarly with Instagram Rooms is like Clubhouse, but it's a Clubhouse where you're watching someone talk to the camera, which is, to be honest, something we're all a bit sick of. You know, Zoom calls are surely going to drop off a cliff once we can all stop doing them again. So it's a bit of a strange one. I just feel like a lot of these social networks need to pick their channel and run with it. And creators too. I think we're seeing creators who previously would term themselves lifestyle and cover everything under the sun, and now starting to narrow down on those areas of expertise and content type that they're good at, they love, and they know their audiences love too. And finally, I guess, greater scrutiny. I think, you know, we've covered it, but the ethics and morality, I think that's going to be important. People are becoming more picky as to who they follow and why, and they're doing more digging into not just what people believe, but how readily they are to speak up. So I don't think influencers can sit on the fence any longer and say, hey, I'm apolitical. They're having to come forward and say, you know, I hold these views and you can follow me if you agree with them. And if you don't, please don't follow me. So I think we're going to see the kind of potentially a decline in the pretty side of influencer marketing in terms of just nice pictures of nice people doing nice things. And we're going to start to see more meaningful content that has a kind of strong message behind it, a strong message associated with ethics, morality, and other social issues.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. Those are really good kind of looks into the future. Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for joining me, Nick. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next episodes. You can also connect with us on all major social channels and let us know what you thought about today's episode. Have your content consumption habits changed over the course of the year? Make sure to let us know. We've been Giraffe Social Media. You've been amazing. We'll see you next time.